Alright, g'day, I'm Luke.
I'm Bundy.
And this is the Noise Levels podcast. Welcome back, Colden.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, so we've had a bit of a break, a bit of a snooze between episodes, but we're back refreshed for 2025. I have to say, this is, what have you been doing with yourself, Bundy, all this time?
Well, we had Christmas and just, doing the usual stuff, I guess.
Yeah, you dug a few holes.
Yeah, I actually did dig a couple of holes.
Oh, and, you sent me a photo of yourself digging a hole.
Yeah, awesome.
This is the most challenging podcast that we've ever attempted. I've delayed it for so long because there always seemed to be more that I could gather to fill in the bigger picture of this particular story. But it's a hell of a story, man. It was like if I kept researching, it just was never going to happen. So this is what we've got. So we're doing an episode on Tutti Parze, who are a band from the late 80s and early 90s in Sydney. And I use the word Sydney loosely, which I'll explain in a bit. And just a bit of a story around them, around the punk scene at that time in Australia, around a venue called Jellyheads, which is connected to them as well. And I've got interviews with Willie, Spacey and Stu, who were all vocalists. Willie was the main vocalist, and Jay, who was a punter back then, probably known to most people as Jay Blurter. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so and our story starts in Victoria, actually. So we're going a bit wider than all our previous episodes, which have all sort of had a Western Sydney sort of bent to them. So we're starting in Victoria and in Geelong, of all places, and Willie is the start of this story, and he's the heart of this story in a lot of ways. And here's a clip of him talking about how he first sort of got into punk music.
You remember in 1976 when that Sex Pistols famous interview happened, where they were swearing on TV, and it'd be nothing now, but at the time, even in Australia in the media, it was shock horror. Well, my father made the fatal mistake of saying, "Son, I can put up with Alice Cooper, but there's this new music called punk rock." And he told me about the Sex Pistols and Johnny Rotten and all this stuff, right? And I never want you to get involved with that. This was around 1979 in Geelong. There's no fucking internet or anything like that. You went to your record shop and you flicked through all the covers till you found something that was interesting, and then you went up to the counter and they'd give you the headphones and play the record for you, right? So I was doing that, tracking down music as a kid, right? And some older guys, punk rockers who just got out of prison, saw me. I was a little 13-year-old punk rocker, right? These guys were all around 20. And we were talking about music, and they wanted to start a band. And I wanted to be in a fucking band, right? So we started this band called Dogs on Heat. We rehearsed a few times, but none of us could play anything, right? Nothing at all. We didn't even have a drum kit. I had a 16-year-old teddy boy friend of mine playing on cardboard boxes, right? But you got this punk band starting in Geelong with older prisoners with a 13-year-old, 14-year-old school kid singing, and they're called Dogs on Heat. That's fucking outrageous. And just the mere mention of it had fucking venues coming out going, "Oh, they're never going to be allowed to play here," right? And I watched and I learned from that, yeah, because it was on a micro scale, yeah, because it was Geelong. It was fucking tiny working class place. The first generation, the 70s punk rock and roll, was an aesthetic and a sort of art movement, right? We were nasty little working class kids with a little bit of political nous, right? We weren't middle class art college students, right? So bands like Crass spoke to us. I went to a gig. It was on a Monday night or something, so I had school, and it was put on by a group called SPAC, the Sex Pistols Appreciation Club. It's from Deakin University, one of their clubs, right? And it had free wine casts and free kegs, so I had to get the flyer and cut that bit off and then cut letters out of the newspaper and stuff saying how it was under constant adult supervision from the university and there's no alcohol, and then show the new improved fucking flyer to me dad and go, oh, fucking, can you take me to this and pick me up after it?
So that was Willie talking about how he discovered punk and his first band, Dogs on Heat, who are not a well-known band. That's a footnote in punk history in Geelong. And so we're sort of, that's sort of situated around the early to mid-80s, probably more like 81, 82, I think. And then he started another band after that called The Tribe. And they rented a space above a shop in Geelong to rehearse. And then they started going to Melbourne to play shows. And that's sort of the start of this story. So Melbourne at that time, it was a time of artistic expression and countercultural, anti-capitalist sort of sentiments within the punk community. So you remember that?
All the cool stuff.
Yeah. Have you seen the movie Wall Street, Bundy?
Yeah.
Yeah, where
that's Michael Douglas.
Yeah, Michael Douglas.
Yeah,
he talks about greed is good. That was the mainstream 80s. So the mainstream 80s was yuppies and, you know, let's make some money, you know, and all that sort of stuff, and not necessarily being all that environmentally conscious and all the stuff that was the opposite of the 90s. And the punks were the people reacting against that. Yeah. So there's there's like a novel written about in 2013 called Cairo, which is sort of set in the social atmosphere of this time. And these punks with Willie and a bunch of other people, they moved into their old St. Vincent de Paul's girls' orphanage in South Melbourne, which had been abandoned for at least 20 years by that point. And they move into this building and they squat there. They're squatters. Yep. So this is like the classic sort of punk squat sort of scenario. And this place becomes known as the Orphanage, and it's like infamous now for being the birthplace of Tutti Parze and a bunch of other bands and things like that. There's all kinds of stuff happening. This is what I mean about going into a deep dive about this stuff, Bundy. Like, I went down this wormhole of all these things that were happening in Melbourne at the time. So there was this painting called Picasso's Weeping Woman, which was stolen, and it's Australia's greatest unsolved art heist. And this is sort of tied into this sort of scene, not necessarily tied into Tutti Parze and Willie and all that, but all these punks and people squatting in Melbourne. That's what the novel Cairo is sort of based on, this theft of this painting that was never really sort of found. And it was basically like a ransom note was put out, and then the painting eventually showed up again in I think a locker in a train station or something like that. Okay. Because the art community said, give it back and we won't do anything about it. So it's never been solved.
Painting to ransom.
Yeah, they did. And then another thing happened in 1986 called the Russell Street bombing, which is like a really infamous event, which ended in it involved the death of a police officer, a young police officer, she'd recently become a police officer, and none of this stuff's linked directly to Tutti Parze, but all these events were leading to political and police pressure being placed on the squatting punks of Melbourne, and it's a very volatile time. And there's a Liberal MP at the time, Jeff Lee, was calling for the squatters to be evicted, and he was calling for this, and they were getting up in Parliament saying all these punks in the orphanage need to be kicked out. Yeah. They need to be arrested. And punks being what they are, they antagonised these people. I'm not going to include the poem. They wrote a poem about the dead police officer and sent it into a newspaper, I think. And making fun of the fact that the police officer had been killed, even though they hadn't done it, but just to antagonise the authorities, which was, just led to police raids on the orphanage and all this sort of stuff. So here's a bit about Willie talking about the orphanage in his own words.
It was an old orphanage in South Melbourne. There was two of them. There was a boys' orphanage and there was a girls' orphanage. We were in the girls' orphanage. At the turn of the 20th century, it used to house 400 little girls, right? There'd be rooms full of baths at waist height with little steps going up to the baths, so the nuns didn't have to bend over and wash the kids. There was big dormitories, chapels, a whole fucking school, all the classrooms and everything. It took up a whole city block, and it was surrounded by 15-foot-high fucking walls, like a medieval castle. We were like the rats that move into an abandoned fucking building before it's gentrified. constantly. It was like a magical sign. If we fucking were squatting in your suburb, that meant when we leave, your properties will be worth a fucking shitload because it's getting gentrified.
So it's hard not to think about how symbolic this is, and Willie hits the nail on the head when referring to himself as being like rats. As this is a common theme in this story. Rats became a symbol for anarcho-crust punks like Tutti Parze. Hence why that's the image that we've used for the thumbnail.
Yep.
It was a really tense time. So, the police were being antagonised by the people in the orphanage, the Russell Street bombing, there was fury in Parliament and the media. And Willie said to me as well, the media didn't have terrorists to scare people with in the mid-'80s. They had bank robbers and squatting punks instead.
Yeah.
So like they were like the poster boys for the Murdoch media to beat up at that time. So the police started raiding the orphanage weekly. Their belongings were being smashed, punks were being beaten, pet rats were being squashed because they all had pet rats with sledgehammers. This only served to further radicalise these punks, and that the punks would go on to start Tutti Parze. And it leads to this scenario where they leave Melbourne, but the way they left is they got their hands on a bus and they all just loaded up into this bus.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so here's Willie talking about what he calls the death bus from hell.
In Melbourne, working for the Squatters Union, it was that really militant time in the 80s, and it got worse and worse, more violent with the cops, and it was stressful being in the media almost weekly at that stage. We got given a bus, 1966 Bedford school bus with no rear windows, no brakes. It could only go like fucking 40 k's an hour, and it backfired. It was a fucking wreck, right? And we painted Death Bus from Hell on it, and we all piled on that, and off we left Melbourne, right? Because I'd already gone up to Mullumbimby in the forest and found us a little wooden hut in the forest for all of us to go live in, right? So we're on this bus, and it's full of fucking teenage crusty punks with their rats and fucking... We had no licensed driver, no registration, and every town we'd go through, there would be cops waiting 10 k's outside town who would escort us through town to the fucking petrol station if we needed fuel, and then escort us 10 k's out the other side of town and radio to the next one. All the way, right? Because they knew who we were. And they knew if they stopped us in their little town, we'll just fucking live there. And they really didn't want to deal with that. So I went to Sydney and started Tutti Parze. Now, everyone said it wouldn't work because we were heavily political and the Sydney scene wasn't political then, right? But we lived in northern New South Wales and we had a fucking magical power called cannabis. So as long as we provided lots of free cannabis at our early gigs, people would come. And that's what we did. We were stretched between Melbourne and Mullumbimby.
How do you sustain a band like that with that level of transience?
Fucking with great difficulty. Look, what it meant is we all had to come together for a set few months, a couple of times a year. Look, but it was a pretty big collective. There's a lot of people that can say they were part of Tutti Parze. There was something for people to gather around and build on, yeah?
So there you go. So kind of sounds like the movie First Blood was actually based on real events.
So this band is essentially stretched between Melbourne, Sydney, and Mullumbimby, which is up near Nimbin and that sort of area in northern New South Wales. And they become a band in Sydney called Tutti Parze, led by Willie and a bunch of other people. And they're also based in Nimbin as well, and they're going back and forth between the two. Well, I should say Mullumbimby, not Nimbin, but in the forest up there. So Willie went up there and then came back and got everyone once he found like a place in Mullum, and then they became known by locals as the Rat People in Mullumbimby. And you know, they set up a new squad in Sydney on Palmer Street, and then that's basically how it starts. And so I've now got an interview with, or a clip from Spacey, who's another one of the vocalists, talking about what Sydney was like at that time and the gathering sort of mass of people coming together in this scene. And also Willie talking about meeting the guitarist of Tutti Parze, who we'll talk a bit more about in a bit, but that's Billy Hughes, who most people will know for his work in Downtime and Toe to Toe. This was the band he did before Toe to Toe.
Yeah.
So here's Spacey talking.
Well, but we got together as a group. So the people from Melbourne who are in the Orphanage, I'm going to say some names: Willie, Flip, Doc, Nipper, all of those guys, Donna, Carol, Jen. There was a lot of them that came up. They were drug affected by this stage.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's why they went to Nimbin first. We were living in our own squats in Redfern at the time, George Street. We actually met them at a Rock Against Work at Hopetown, is where we would all go during the week, and we'd meet them because I was doing shift work, and that's how we met. We'd sit there and start talking about music and all of this kind of stuff, and that's how Billy got met for Tutti Parze as well, got invited to go down and do an interview. An interview with Nipper and Simon to do the guitar for Tutti Parze then. They'd already started writing some music. Willie had a band called The Tribe. Willie loved bands. So Willie had a band called The Tribe down in Victoria. They'd split up and come up here. Nipper and Willie had already started to talk about another band and getting another band together. They'd sit there and start writing music already, start writing lyrics. There were girls already into it, which were Donna, Jen and Carol. Carol was a good one of writing a lot of lyrics and stuff as well.
Billy, he was quite young. He was like 15, I think, at the time. He was quite young, yeah. And he could play guitar, and he wanted to join the band, and he got together with Nipper and stuff. So when I came down 2 weeks later, those three had already started, trying to get some music together and stuff. And we just built on it from there.
Mm. So you would have heard them mention Rock Against Work there.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great concept.
Yeah, you rock against work all the time, don't you?
Oh, I try to, but...
Yeah. So these were shows at the Hopetown, who had the bright idea at the time. So, it's just... I think it's really hard to conceive of just how many shows there were back then. You could go to a show every single day of the week. It's not like... When we started going to shows in, the late 90s, about 10 years after this...
Yeah, weekends and
Thursday nights and maybe, a jam night on a Wednesday.
Yeah.
But, there'd be shows on Tuesday nights and things like that.
Yeah.
And the Hopetown had this bright idea of putting a show on in the middle of the day for all the unemployed people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, these shows were in the late 80s and early 90s. Bands like You and I played them and things like that. So, it would have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so this is where these communities are starting to form. So, Nipper and Willie, who are from down in the Orphanage, they met Soy at these Rock Against Work shows. So you'll hear them refer to Soy or Simon, who is the drummer. And, they also, I think they picked up a member or two in Mullumbimby. I'm not really sure about that. So, this is a band that is essentially anti-cops, anti-vivisection, anti-skinheads. So there's a big sort of antagonism between skinheads and punks back then, which was born out of skinheads coming to shows and basically ruining them with violence and things like that. And the anti-cop sentiment in Sydney was bolstered by when a guy called Dave Grundy was shot in his bed by police in Redfern. And so there was a large Redfern protest at the time that lots of punks attended. And another punk band from the time, Deviant Kickback, have a song about this guy, Dave Grundy, and what happened. Or Dave Gundy, I should say. I'm going to try and do an overview of who's who in the band, because it is a big band with lots of different members. Willie is the vocalist from start to finish. Billy Hughes is the guitarist from start to finish. There was also Donna on vocals, and I think she was there the entire time, and she now lives in America.
Yep.
And Simon and Sawyer on drums. So these are the 4 consistent members from start to finish. Nipper's on bass for the first 3 years, and then he's replaced on bass by a guy called Spin, and he's the bass player for the last 3 years. He disappeared from the band in their final year, and then he was briefly replaced by a guy called Damien. There were other vocalists who were sort of brought into the fold, and they'd get up and do backup vocals and lead vocals on some songs, and that's Jenny. She was a vocalist in the first couple of years. Stu Magoo, who is a vocalist in the second half of the band's time. Spacey, who came in around 1990, and she was a vocalist for 3 years. And then I've seen references to people called Mega and Agro and Mary, who filled in on some vocals. And the Keith also filled in on drums sometimes. So you'll notice that these names aren't the sort of names you get out of a baby book.
Well, Agro, come on, you gotta put that in there.
No, well, Nipper and Spin and Stu Magoo. So there's an explanation for why they have these extra names, and I'll play a clip from Spacey now.
So we were at the warehouse, and the cops would come around all the time, and what we had in the kitchen was a chook wheel. So a round wheel on the wall to say who was washing and whose turn it was to go and get washing up, whose turn it was to go and do the food and that kind of stuff. So we'd keep it a bit organised. But they came and they'd take the chook wheel off the wall, and they'd turn around and they'd call us out, right, come and line up. Come and show us ID, what he has been doing, and just hassle about in general. So we had to change all our names on the chook wheel because we just kept getting hassled out by the cops. So that's how all our names got changed, basically. And mine, because I was doing bass, basically a bass case is what they used to call me. So that's how I got Space.
So it's really hard to talk about Tutti Parze without mentioning Punk's Picnics. That's a big part of this too. What do you know about Punk's Picnics, Bundy?
I think we went to one at... What's that pub that shut down now?
No, it wouldn't have been a pub. It would have been... The vast majority of them have been in Sydney Park.
I'm thinking of Hardcore Barbecue. That's what I'm thinking of. No, I don't think... I can't recall. I think they might have been finished by the time we were...
Oh, they're still going. So they still have them.
Oh, there you go.
So, all right. The Punk's Picnics are basically a Sydney institution. They've been running for about 30... Must be close to 37 years now, I reckon.
Yeah, wow. How come we've never been? Well, I've been.
I've been to some, but they're in Sydney. We're basically suburban folk.
Yeah.
out here in Penrith.
Yeah.
I guess
I don't like to leave Penrith.
No, so I guess our equivalent might have been when we had some shows on top of Judge's Car Park. So these shows would happen in, and still do happen in, Sydney Park in St. Peter's, where the brickworks are, and it's a big part of Tutti Parze's story is connected to the Punk's Picnics because they used to play there. And I think you need to sort of acknowledge Punk's Picnic as part of the context of that scene, the DIY sort of aspect. They go down to the park and set up down there and put on a show. The Punk's Picnics didn't start in Sydney Park though. They started, and they didn't have bands the first few either in 1987 when they first started. So here's Spacey talking about the origins of the Punk's Picnics.
Punk's Picnics back then were pub crawls, or in a park just drinking parties. No one ever played at a Punk's Picnic. So it wasn't a music thing. We changed them when we got to Sid Park because we found power. We had the first two at the Domain, and then the third one was the one outside the Lansdowne where there's a lot of pictures and the cops showed up. We were going to have a beating with the skinheads, and we heard the skinheads were going to come down and pulverise us. So we put some, bits of wood and that behind trees and all of that kind of stuff. And this is outside the Lansdowne. So we went to this park, and then the cops came in and they went absolutely crazy. Still to this day, the biggest thing that we remember is a Commodore Cop D car come flying through the park, skidded out and almost landed straight in the pond right in front of all of us. Then after that, there was just cops on horses and stuff, just taking people away non-stop. They were just picking them up and dragging them along. But yeah, they came in and quite a few people were arrested, which again comes back to nursing. It was lucky being a nurse. I was allowed to go and actually get them all out with my nurse ID and stuff. Actually, it ended up being, well, sometimes it was good being a nurse, sometimes it wasn't, because I did get taken down the cop shop for something else as well that wasn't that great, which they thought I might have had something to do with, which I didn't. So, at times it was really good and at times it wasn't at all. whatsoever. Yeah.
So yeah, the first punks picnic was at the Domain, and it didn't even have bands. And it was a pub crawl before that, but a bunch of people got arrested at the Lansdowne by the cops, and that's why they settled down in a park to have their picnic. And so I just got a few clips here from Spacey talking about how she became vocalist for Tutti Parze a bit later on, and Stu Magoo also talking about the same thing, how he joined the band, and just some stuff about the punk scene at the time. And then I've also got in the mix Jay Blurter talking about the first time he saw Tutti Parze, which is great just to get a punter's view of what it was like back then to watch them.
Jen and Carol and Donna were the original female singers, so it wasn't just Willie, it was a four vocalists to start with. So I did that as a thing to come in and replace people and to keep it going. And then slowly over the years that we went on, depending on, some of the time people couldn't show up. We were also adults at the time and had to do things. Some of us had kids, some of us didn't. Sometimes members wouldn't show up at all for gigs. So we had to be ready for that as well. And so we just had people around who could play. So Spin was always there to be able to do our bass for us if he was there. And we had different people being able to help sing as well.
I remember the first show that I saw at Tutti Parze was at Max's at the Petersham Hotel. There was a back room there. They used to play shows and just formed friendships with everyone, and more predominantly Billy, because Billy was like a really easygoing sort of guy and would like to include everyone, and so that was a good thing. Because I knew everyone and everyone from the band just from going to gigs and stuff. And then Billy said one day, he said, would you like to do a couple of songs? So we just trundle off then from Billy's place in Lilyfield, and then we used to go and do band practice down in a house in Palmer Street down in Woolloomooloo. Which they had a sort of a practice room set up in the front room there.
Went on tour down in Melbourne with Tutti Parze in 1988, 89. Now, apparently we went to Adelaide. I'd really like to know if anybody actually saw us play in Adelaide. None of us personally can remember playing in Adelaide. We remember going down there. We remember going down to Melbourne. There's photos of us in Melbourne, but no one can find anything in Adelaide. But people say they saw us play Tutti Parze playing in Adelaide. So that's really funny because none of us can remember that.
Just from high school, I was sort of interested. We knew about the Hard-Ons and a few other bands. I remember we used to go to shows at the Den at Penshurst and at the Sutherland Royal in Sutherland. We used to look in the street press and see shows advertised. So me and another guy, Dean, we'd just rock up and, we ended up just forming friendships with everyone. It felt like such a big family and like such a big community. And I think Tutti Parze was, really good for that it's, through the shows that were put on, really, just galvanised and reinforced to people that sort of family and community attitude, like, because of the politics within the band and then which then transferred within the majority of the scene. I think it was just more that's what attracted me and kept me in the scene for like all that time, was just that sense of community.
The Punks Picnic, just the whole place is just full of, it was just full of fucking proper, UK 1982 looking punks, spiky hair, leather jackets, spikes, torn up clothes, tartan, like traditional punks, to the T. And I remember walking around the corner of the Punks Picnic and just saying, oh my fucking God, we're going to get our heads kicked in today. And started mingling, and next thing you know, it was just the warmest walking. I met friends that day that are still friends to me today. That was the first day I met Billy from Tutti Parze, and I remember seeing Tutti Parze for the first time and just thinking to myself, like, these guys, they're just the real deal. This day and age, you see punk rockers, you buy a look. In those days, they earned that look. That was them. They were like gutter punks, really fucking anti-fascist, anti-capitalist, very political, all very tribal in a way. I remember that, there was a lot of this tribal community sort of spirit. and they were fucking aggressive, mate. To this day, like my favourite all-time Australian hardcore band is Toe to Toe, but a Tutti Parze show was just intense. It was fucking Billy's guitar sound was nothing like anyone's ever had before. That old shitty Japanese-made Vantage guitar and his Yamaha 100-watt combo. It was just really, really aggressive, and their message was full on. They were so raw, and everything counted. Like in between songs, it was all, you know, they were doing a lot of what you, I suppose, you know, sometimes I'd say that's preaching, but they were teaching. Me being like I was probably 18 then. I still wasn't that young when I saw them. I think maybe 17. You know, I came from the suburbs from a pretty redneck migrant dad who, you know, doesn't really like to sway, doesn't like anything going away from the Catholic sort of way of thinking, and everyone has to be a straight white male and work hard. Well, here we are. I'm watching Tutti Parze. I'm from the burbs, and I'm getting a lesson in life, really, you know, of how it really is, how the government is, how the banks are, how the cops are. And, man, it was fucking intense. And I still think to this day, like I've seen a lot of bands, I've seen a lot of fucking good bands, but I just feel that how pure they were and how raw they were at that time, I don't think I think they've been untouchable. Plenty of good political bands, plenty of good bands with message, plenty of bands with, you know, that are really, really intense. You had other bands like Subversion later on who, mate, they fucking nailed it. They were just in your face. But Tutti Parze just had something so primal and so raw.
Right, so that's setting the scene now, and we're going to play a song, and this will be your first time hearing Tutti Parze.
Yeah.
So this is a song from their 7-inch, and it's called It's Time Now.
Okay, that song was called It's Time Now. Well, you can really hear the infancy of hardcore punk in that track, and you can definitely tell Billy's guitar sound.
Yeah.
He loves that. Oh, it's like a real electronic-y
Yeah, it's like
sort of...
halfway between metal and punk.
Yeah.
And like, I remember him saying that once, like, one of the couple of times that we got to meet Billy, way later on when he was in downtime, saying, you know, he just sits in the middle, like he can't really pick a side between punk and metal.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Yeah. Here's a clip of Willie talking about the differences between New South Wales and Victorian cops. The cops have been mentioned a lot in this story. They're essentially the antagonists of this story alongside the skinheads. And, you know, this is more of a narrative than most of the ones that we've done so far for the podcast. But anyway, here's Willie just talking about the differences between them.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Compared to Melbourne before that, it never felt like we clashed with police in Sydney. It really didn't. Like, what we got away with in Sydney, no fucking way would we have done. Like, no, man, like, yeah. Look, at the orphanage, we had a fucking bell to ring for police raids. We expected the police to come and overturn our place and smash everything up and slap us around once a week at one stage. Going to the fucking shop 200 metres away from the orphanage, there was a damn good chance you were going to get fucking stopped by the police and pulled apart and harassed. Sydney felt like fucking freedom, mate. Sydney's policing culture was very different to Melbourne's policing culture. Yeah, in Sydney, they just seem to be calmer about it. Even when they raided Jellyheads, that famous one that we played, that wouldn't have happened like that in Melbourne, mate. There would have been, like when me and Donna, I think with Billy, sat on the roof and negotiated over the police radio that we had taken off them, that will give you your radio and your fucking hat and badge back if you release the kids that you fucking arrested. There would have been no negotiations like that in the early 80s in Melbourne. They just would have called in 100 cops, soggies with fucking dogs like little black ninjas with black lumps of wood, and they just would have come in hard and fucking squashed us all. They wouldn't even care if the fucking TV cameras were there. Sydney was too glamorous.
So you would have heard there him talking about an incident at Jellyheads during a Tutti Parze show at Jellyheads, and we haven't really covered Jellyheads yet, but an undercover cop on the inside at this show, at this warehouse that they ran, had been identified by the punks and roughed him up a bit, and then the cops all poured in and raided the place. And 14 punks were initially detained, so they arrested about 14 people at this show. But Willie and Donna and Billy managed to get a hold of a police hat and a radio and then climbed up onto the roof and used these as bargaining chips to secure the release of all their friends and all the punters.
You couldn't write this into a movie script.
No,
really.
man, like, it's just incredible. And like, no arrests were made. The police just gave the hostages back, or the arrested the man. They said it would have been too embarrassing for them, I guess. And like, there's a great book called Australia, which came out last year, a 2-volume book by Tristan Clark, which tells the story of punk in Australia in all the states. Amazing book. I can't recommend it enough. And he writes in it about how after the band had gotten into the confrontation with the police at this show, they said over the radio, you can go back to the station and explain to your sergeant that a bunch of drunk kids took your walkie-talkie and hat. So,
well played.
Yeah, so it is a recorded story, and yeah, that's Willie's perspective. That's his one big incident with New South Wales police. He said it's nothing like Victorian police, but obviously there's different perspectives. And here's Spacey talking about her perspective of the police and just violence in the 80s punk scene in general.
We were actually already being hassled out by cops. Skinheads are throwing us out of pubs for attacking our friends. One girl, they ripped their shirt off. Subliminal pressure. I think this was in the Gaelic or the Junos. I can't remember which club this was in. skinheads went in and went to take them off the stage. They went to pulverise them off the stage. A big group of us had to march in and try and get them off the stage and out of the pub before they got smashed, which is what happened. So that is what sort of got us all together to start fighting back. Like, these guys are arseholes. They're hammering us. What are we going to do? With that came the music. We started playing the music with that as a mode to try and get everyone together to try and help fight back and take our pubs back and stuff. Like, there were pubs that these guys were coming into and smashing us out of. We had a night at the Evening Star of when the skinheads were outside the pub and they came and smashed the car. They were pulverising on the top and on the door and on the front. They ripped the door off as we were flying down the road. And so if we weren't getting hammered by them, we were getting hammered by cops. If we weren't getting hammered by cops, like the guys, you know, would always get hammered walking down the main road. At that time in the 80s, in the mid to late 80s, was very against anything different, against coloured hair, against piercings, against tattooing, against you looking different, non-conformist, against all of that, very much so.
And so let's just give you an idea of the scene at the time and get a sense of the context that Tutti Parze were playing in. Here's Spacey talking about some of the other bands in that scene, and like there's like a whole cluster of bands around Tutti Parze who are sort of known as part of that same scene in Sydney. So anyway, here's Spacey talking about it.
Tofu Terry was a lot like Crass in a way. I don't know Keith would like you saying that, but a bit more like Crass. It was a bit more mellow in the way that it did it. It wasn't as angry and aggressive and as attacking as Tutti Parze was. Mm-hmm. Tofu Terry was very Crass. Stevie and Keith back with a mixture made up of Simon, who did drums for Tutti Parze. Then you've got Fred Nihilist, which was going when we first, or around the early 80s there, mid-80s there. And they were very protest, very, very protest. And they also helped start Jellyheads as well, which was our venue that we started and did a lot of stuff for. They did a lot of stuff for that. They also did a lot of stuff called Vibe Tribe, which played at Sid Park. So we'd have a punk's picnic and then we'd have this dork going on afterwards. And that was them doing that Vibe Tribe, non-bozzy posse. It's quite anarchistic. All the bands really were then because we had a message to give out, and that's what, again, was promoting us. We didn't make the bands first and then go protesting. We did the protesting and then decided, right, we've got to get our message out there. Let's start some fucking bands.
So we heard Spacey talking about a bunch of bands then, and other bands around that time are Mahatma Propagandy, so not to be confused with Propagandy overseas. This was an early Australian band. Rocks were playing around that time too. And another band that Spacey refers to is a band called I Am Bacteria, I Am Filth, which is such an amazing name for a band. And this is what she had to say about them.
They had a chainsaw.
Yeah.
They had a chainsaw. I don't know
what
yet.
What do they do with the chainsaw?
And they said, I don't know. They just made a lot of noise with the chainsaw.
Yeah.
I can't remember them ever cutting something off, but someone might correct me on that on the stage. They might have.
And coming into contact with Spacey to research this has been great too, because she just has a treasure trove of material. And so another band from this time is Subliminal Pressure, and this is the only song I have of them. So we'll play a song from this band, just so, you know, why not? It's another band from this time, and it's just, if you like punk music, you'll like this.
The world's spinning faster like a mad skeg around. Macron just won't ask it to ever slow down. We're pushing it harder, addicted to speed. The force here with dizzy with power and greed. My eyes are blurry now, I can't see a thing. I'm caught in a new song and ordered to sing. Now we're pushing it further, now our morals are slow. They're lost in the backwash before they could grow. In their place, it's a definite crime. Find money and soul, it'll spoil your pride. The ripping from my chance will never be felt. The only way was to soul for your money belt. In their place, it's a definite crime. Find money and soul, it'll spoil your pride. The ripping from conscience will never be felt. The only way for the soul for your money bells. Spinning too fast, it's got to slow down. With more time for people and living all around. We've got a story harbor full of things that mean most. The feeling of belonging to this ultimate host. We've got to try and see we've all got the same road to change for the better, even though it's all right. To slow down the years, to slow down the days. The governments don't want us to see out the maze. The targets are breaking and others expect. We know they lie, but it's just what instead. We've got to hit hard where they just don't expect. With a fist full of cash and love and respect. Economic access is what I'm spending on. We'll have to go down if our country is strong. Should lie for each other, it's really exist. Across every nation, humanity will win.
It's on a wild chase. Once stopped, he appeared to offer no resistance. It would have been hard to, surrounded by 10 officers, but the lay pulling lashing out with chains and drops. But even after seeing the video, he said he was yet to be convinced excessive force was used.
We know they are lies, but it's just what instead. We've got to hit hard where they just don't expect. With a fist full of cash and love and respect. The economic access is what I'm spending on. We'll have to grind down if the country is strong. She lies for each other, just really exist. Across every nation, humanity will win.
So Tutti Parze, we've sort of roughly been following a timeline of them. So we've sort of gone through all their 80s stuff, and we're up to the 90s, which is like 1990, 1991, which is when they did their recording and when they started Jellyheads, were involved in Jellyheads. So they only recorded once during their lifespan, one 7-inch, which we've played a song from, and there is another recording of them, a live recording, which was released much later, and we'll play a song from that later too. But they're the two recordings that they have, and there's a fabled third recording from much later, which we'll talk about at the end. But anyway, here's Spacey talking about recording and what it was like for this mass of crusty punks to go into the studio.
This is 1991. We haven't been in a recording studio before. We haven't heard all the sound effects or anything at all like that. And we just thought they were amazing. Yeah, listen to that. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, we'll have some of that. Oh, we'll have more of this. Oh, hey, let's scream. Rah. Yeah. It was funny. So that's why we did it. It was just fascinating. It was a fascinating thing. I went on to do live sound and audio engineering after that because I was so fascinated with it at uni. So it was a great thing to do.
So, Rats, Bundy.
Yep.
What do you think of Rats?
Oh, I know, I'm scared shitless of them.
Really? I didn't know that. Is it the hands? They got those little human hands on them? Like,
yeah, I don't know. They just, yeah.
So
I'm a big wuss for stuff like that.
We talked about Rats being a symbol of these punks, and so here's Spacey talking about Radis, which is their mascot essentially, and the symbol that they used on a lot of things, and she just places it into a bit of context for us.
So Radis was our label for our beer as well. What Radis was is Willie was really into a band called Negazione. They did a song called Radis. From that, everybody down in Palmer Street and everywhere had rats on their shoulders, walk around with rats. So rats was a very big pet for a lot of people then. So I think Willie's rat might have been called Radis, and it had to do with his other Negazione and Ben and all that. So, and that was a symbol in a way. And it's still a symbol to this day from what I can tell. You know, a lot of people will see that rat and will either go straight to Tutti Parze or straight to Sid Park. or the warehouse, whatever it means or whatever they remember it meaning to them, which is pretty amazing, really, that a picture does that. And pretty humbling, yeah, it's great.
It was an important time in, like, Australian underground music history. A lot of people came together collectively to create something. Because it wasn't just Tutti Parze. There was a whole bunch of bands, that came up.
Yeah, we went to Nimbin and we did Gathering of the Tribes. Which was pretty cool, actually. Like a few bands from Melbourne, like Warp Spasm came up.
Have you been to Nimbin, Bundy?
I haven't actually, no. I've been to what's it called?
Mullumbimby.
Yeah, Mullumbimby, but I haven't been to Nimbin, no.
Yeah, I haven't been to Mullumbimby. I've been to Nimbin, which was an experience.
Yeah.
I loved going to Nimbin.
Yeah.
Not because I'm into drugs or anything like that. I'm not at all. But I just thought it's on the bucket list for any Australian who's travelling around this country to see Nimbin, because it is an alternative community, which is pretty cool.
I remember, the thing that I got stuck in my head was, in the 80s as a kid growing up watching the current affair, and it was at least once a week there was a story about pot smoking in Nimbin. And how the cops need to get out there and crack them some heads or something.
Yeah, so and Nimbin's a funny place. Like, you go there now and you'll get offered to buy a weed off someone just walking in the street, but like, if there's cops who sit on the outskirts of town, probably like a kilometre radius around it. To catch anyone who's trying to take that out of the town, and I think they sort of tolerate it in the town. A bit like that analogy of the homeless guy who's got his alcohol, his long neck in the brown paper bag.
Yeah.
Everyone knows it's beer inside that brown paper bag. But if he keeps it in the brown paper bag, we can pretend it's not beer. I think it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
So they mentioned this gig called the Gathering of the Tribes, where because the band was sort of half based in Mullumbimby, Tutti Parze actually went up there and they played a show, and it was over a couple of days. Warp Spasm were there, Tutti Parze were there, Deviant Kickback, another Sydney band, were there, and a few of the members of these bands, or at least from Tutti Parze, remained there after as part of the Terania Creek vegan anarchist community that's set up there. I think Willie sort of lived in this area for a bit. But then this leads to this other thing called Jellyheads, which we've been talking about, which is a collective of punks in 1991-ish. And they held a meeting at Newtown Cemetery, from which this collective was created. And like, the pubs had gotten too hard to play due to gaming lounges, which were squeezing the bands out. And Tutti Parze, who didn't typically charge anything for their gigs, their shows, they would just wanted to play and have their community come together. They were very anti-capitalist, anarchists. So they weren't into making money from the shows in that way. But like, they didn't like the idea that the pubs were making heaps of money from them in terms of beer sales.
Yeah.
So gigs after this point started being held in halls, like the Newtown Neighbourhood Centre, so they could raise money for this collective venue, Jellyheads. They wanted a permanent venue and sometimes a little bit of a squat where like some people could sometimes stay, and they organised it in this 2-storey building which was behind a brewery. They rented it near Central Station. They had a pool table there, a video projector so they could have movie nights, a vegan cafe / vegan cooking lessons, a stage and a PA. They hosted fundraisers for various causes. They even had a newspaper that was printed by a prisoners' action group, who were given a space upstairs. So it wasn't just the punks there; they had all kinds of community groups there, they even had like a kids group or like a creche where people could leave their kids. So it was just this. It sounds like a really amazing space.
Absolutely.
Before our time.
Yeah.
Lots of punks from the early 90s will be aware of this place and probably went and saw a show there. Anyway, here's Spacey, Stu and Will all talking about their memories of Jellyheads.
So Jellyheads was because we were taken over by all the gambling coming in, the poker machines and stuff. And that's why we had Sid Park as well to play at, just so somewhere we could play where we wouldn't get harassed and you wouldn't have to worry about money and stuff. There was nowhere to play. Places were closing down like so quickly. They were closing down all over Sydney. There was nowhere to play, all over Australia actually. And so for the music scene, it was really, really bad, and we had to think of alternative places to play. So with Jellyheads, we wanted to try and find our own place where they wouldn't control it, and we could have our own venue where cops and them wouldn't come in and wouldn't continuously, do the bad stuff and the negative stuff. But, as it was, it did happen. And at Jellyheads, it was very important as well to have food, drink and all that stuff there too. We just wanted a place of our own. And after years of being hassled out.
Did people live there as well?
Sometimes they would if they were homeless, but not very often. We didn't encourage it. It wasn't a real place for that.
Mm-hmm. It sort of happened at a time where the elements of the scene had changed into like techno and stuff like that. So because of all that, like ecstasy and everything was quite new within the scene, that was sort of attracting the attention of the cops as well. Mm. So like there was I remember one particular show there, and there was some undercover cops that had come to it was a punk show, and like they stood out like sore thumbs, and because it was our venue and everyone felt safe and like empowered and, and cocky as well. It was just like, you pick those guys out from a mile away, and we just started giving them grief. And then like next minute, like, fuck, literally 100 cops just come right like into the venue. They just started trying to arrest people, and it all went crazy. And and then I sort of think after that, like the venue was destined to, just have too much pressure, and people, whether they were committed or not committed, just fell away from it, I think.
There'd always be benefits for Jellyheads to get the money to do it. I still am fucking amazed that we pulled it off. To this day, I just think, fuck, man, we actually did it. We had a cafe, brewed our own fucking beer and cider, had printing presses. There was everything there. Everything.
Why did it finish?
Yeah. Lawfare. The council used lawfare in the end. When dance music started, see, look, our gigs would always finish, like at fucking midnight or something, yeah? I guess so people could get trains home and shit. I don't know, Russell, yeah? Mm. But dance music, those cunts are taking drugs that are going to keep them awake all night, and they have fucking sound systems, 3, 4, 5 times what us punk bands music, yeah, like massive ones, yeah? So noise complaints. Everything they tried before that we could fend off, but once the noise complaints started, it was fought in the courts. It was lost.
So the authorities taking interest in the house due to the anti-authoritarian politicking that came out of it, and the association of the house with Tutti Parze and other punk bands, and the dance music that Willie and Stu both talked about. So this thing happened with these punks at this time because of the drug culture. It did sort of morph into a lot of dance music, and they sort of switched scenes. Some of these people, or like would go to both. And the drugs obviously don't help as far as the police are concerned. So Jellyheads collapses due to a number of reasons, which includes the rise of dance music, noise complaints, drugs. Here's Jay talking about the rise of drugs in this sort of community, and Spacey also talking about a bit of her nursing background and how that sort of came into play.
There were detrimental things in that part of the scene too. Like there was a lot of heroin. Like I said, probably a lot of people using drugs around the time, and we all became wastoids. Like I became a wastoid for fucking 30 years. Ruined my life for a little bit there. But everyone, it's sort of like it was just that scene, and they were doing everything from like doing running squats. They were doing like vegan cafes. That community back then was really, really proactive and pretty. I don't know if you call it PC, but very left wing for the time.
Yes. Yes. There was a few times I had to nick some stuff from work and apply it to, you know, my bros and my besties for sure. Yeah, quite a few times.
So,
and that had to do with drug reversal as well as patching them up or stitches or all of that stuff. Yeah,
So-
I had to do a lot of first aid.
would that have put you in a bit of a mother sort of position to some of these people?
Yeah, still to this day. I actually got called that yesterday.
Yeah.
Because I've got this thing, if I haven't spoken to some of my bros for a while, I will say, look, I haven't spoken to you for a couple of years. I want to hear your voice. I want to make sure you're okay. Like, if I hear your voice, I know you're okay then. Yeah, I said that to a couple of people yesterday. So, yeah, very much. And they went, you're still Mama's face, aren't you? And I am. Yeah,
Well,
very
because
much so.
some of these people wouldn't have had families and things like that.
Yeah, like myself, I didn't.
Yeah.
I actually said that this morning too. What I do at Christmas time is I offer an orphanage Christmas, which is what I used to do at the warehouse. So anybody who doesn't have family, doesn't have a lot of friends on their own or whatever, can always come and hang out with me. I don't have family, so direct family. So, you know, usually people are my family and always will be.
Has that always been the case, Spacey?
Yeah. I was an orphan, yeah. So I was in a kid's home as a child and came out. I've since got in contact with family in and out, but we're not very close when you don't live and grow up with them a lot.
Mm.
So I'm an orphan, so that's why I sort of am aware and a bit more caring, I think, on that side of things.
And the punk community became your family?
Yeah, they still are to this day. Very, very, very much so, yeah.
All right, so one of the things that we haven't really addressed in the course of this podcast in a lot of detail is one of the main players in Tutti Parze, Spin. I've just got some additional material that I've recorded with Willie. It might sound a little bit different because we recorded it separately, just to add in, just to help sort of build this narrative a little bit more.
Spin, the bass player for Tutti Parze, or the second bass player actually after Nipper. He was probably the most talented of all the musicians in Tutti Parze. He could play guitar, drums, bass, piano, trumpet, harmonica. Who knows what else he could play? I've seen him pull out a tin whistle and get like a little Irish jig out of it. So he was musically very talented. I believe he was taught by his mother music, or his mother made him do music when he was young. He was also a very flawed character like the rest of us. None of us were saints, but he was never the sinner everybody thought he was. He was a communist, a Marxist, a paid-up member of the Communist Party, and he was never actually an anarchist. When Jellyhead started putting on the techno parties, that was sort of the death knell for it because of the noise complaints. Now, people at that time were gobbling huge amounts of ecstasy and cocaine as if they were going to achieve Buddhahood if they gobbled enough. They gave lectures to us about how cocaine and ecstasy are positive to the community and heroin is destructive. And when you're having dance parties with, 600-700 kids who aren't part of a close scene, we don't know them, they just turn up for parties, stuff will go missing. And Spin was a very easy target for that. Very easy target. He certainly didn't do everything he was accused of. Was he totally honest with everyone? No. Did he steal? Yes, of course he did. And he scammed and he did lots of things. But he was also exceptionally loyal to me, exceptionally honest to me. So I can't say a bad word about him. I love him dearly as my brother. And I miss him every day.
Next song is pulled from the live CD that was brought out recently. It's called Institutionalized Cruelty. It's an interesting CD. Like, the quality isn't necessarily that great, but I do want to play it. And if you do get a chance to listen to the whole CD, it's got some great stuff of the band talking between the songs, which sort of gives you a sense of what it was like at a Tutti Parze show. Anyway, this is the song from the CD.
For duck season. Gone from my mother's side, thrown into a prison of steel, cuffed, full of shit and hate. You don't care if I think or feel. The life is ripped from my throat. You laugh as I lie in the agony of death. My pitiful corpse kicked aside. No one mourns my termination. I'm strapped down tightly, so I can't express my rage. My head in the vine, my eyelids turned back. The double squirts of liquid which is burning in my eyes. To determine the dose rate that will cause me to die. You're a travesty of beauty, and totally human! Lots of chemicals, keep mine so shiny and soft. After all, the product must be protected at all costs. I'm murdered, skinned, cut up and died. So to my brothers, sisters and friends, so some rich scum can buy me as a present for their lover. Where do you think the fucking leather jacket came from?
So, Tutti Parze began to drift apart in 1992. Members are now spread across the world. I mentioned earlier, Donna is in the US. Lots of members still in Australia. Some members are sadly no longer with us. So Billy Hughes passed on quite a while ago, and Spin, the bass player that was mentioned before, he's been dead for a while as well. And Willie lives in Southeast Asia now. He lives on the border of Thailand and Laos. He's a rice farmer. Yeah, so it was great to talk to him and to hear what it's like for him over there. But anyway, here's I've got a clip of Stu, Spacey, and Willie all talking about the end of Tutti Parze and how that sort of came about.
I think maybe I stopped doing songs with them, and then I think it just sort of descended. Like Billy went off and started doing other stuff, like with Downtime and things like that. So yeah, and I remember Simon. I think around that same time when it was sort of dwindling off, he started, going to uni to do his degree. And also, I think because Donna and like Zoc and Clancy and a few other people within the scene then went to the States and were living over there. So I think, maybe that had a thing, like something to do with the Tutti Parze finishing.
I don't think I've ever seen a band with as much of a rotating roster as you guys had.
Yeah, well, it's sad. I mean, we'll go into the drug stuff. I won't avoid it. You know, they all know that I'm going to be talking about it. We have to talk about it. It was a big thing of our scene. It was a very sad thing of our scene. So when you get into the scene in the early 80s and before everyone came up from Melbourne, not to blame them at all whatsoever, they didn't inject it into anybody, you know.
Yeah.
People took it themselves and bought it themselves and knew what they were doing. And knew how much they were doing at the same time. But it was so controlling in the early 80s, right up until about 1990, 91. It was sort of going okay and fine, and then people really started getting addicted really badly. Money started becoming a thing. People started ripping people off. It started becoming a very negative side, and that's what happened with Tutti Parze. That recording was 91, where they would just take off. So we always had to be prepared if something had happened and they wouldn't show up, or if someone had OD or something had happened. We just had to be ready for it. We were still doing a lot of gigs. We loved doing the music. We loved doing the gigs. We loved the energy of it. We loved putting out that message that Tutti was putting out, you know, to fight the system and to, you know, battle all the stuff that was happening at the time. Really. So in one way it was good, and in another way it was quite sad and quite exhausting. You know, I do remember the day when we decided to stop Tutti Parze. You know, that'll be forever a very hard thing because we loved it. You know, it's our family.
Look, it was a few things. Billy was getting approached by labels and stuff, and he wanted to go. You know, he was like, no, we've got to drop the politics and not be so crusty and fucking... Because he wanted to make a living out of it as a musician. I don't give a fuck about any of that stuff, yeah? I really didn't. I'm a punk rocker. Like, it's my culture. It's not something I'm going to fucking sell. I'll fucking share it and give it away, but I can't put a price on it. I wanted to experience some other things. I wanted to fucking travel and if I stayed in Sydney, my fucking drug habit was just going to destroy me. Took me 30-odd years. The reality is, how I finally got it is I fucking became a single father now. Well, no, I became a parent before I became a single father. Yeah, so I stopped. Like, when I had kids, mate, I looked at them and realised, man, because I wasn't living in Australia. I was living in countries that fucking execute you for it. I looked at the kids and I can't do this to them, like, because I'm all that stands between them and fucking abject poverty. Right? And that realisation, mate, giving up a piece of piss, mate. Single dad, got 3 of my kids here, oldest one down the road with my granddaughter.
That's cool.
Yeah. We own our own home. Could never have done that in Australia. I'd never own a place, mate. Never. Fucking built a home for what is probably a year's rent in Australia.
Yeah, just to recap how you were talking about Sydney and that, it's so different from... you just can't imagine something like that ever happening in Sydney today. Yeah, I mean, like, how would you start your own cafe? So it would cost you $1 million just to buy a shack to put a cafe in.
You can't even put on an all ages show anymore because of liability.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
You have to do it. Yeah, if you want to do it, you have to do it on the fly, like in an alleyway or in a skate park or something like that. And just risk it, you know.
I guess we're kind of lucky that we were sort of like just at the very end before you could put on something like that.
Yeah, definitely. So like, these people who believed in violent revolution, they're now more focused on peace. But the ideals, I found talking to all these people that the ideals are still pretty much the same, which is good to hear. I think like that they still believe in their convictions, and that it wasn't like a phase, that these people lived it, as Jay said. They earned their punk rock look. So from 1992 onwards, Spacey went on to manage some punk bands, like a band called Omnicide and then Bean Flipper after that. And she was very active in the scene through the bulk of the 90s. There was an attempted reforming show in 1997. I think it's Conflict came to Australia on their tour, and they were going to play the Men in Bar, and they wanted the band Conflict, who were a really famous punk band. They wanted Tutti Parze to support them in Sydney, but Willie was living in India at the time, so it wasn't going to happen. So he was travelling through Asia. At some point in the noughties, I hate using that term, but, at some point the band did reform and they did record some new songs at Zen Studios. No one seems to have that recording. If you're out there and you've got that recording, apparently it was on YouTube for a little bit and then it got taken down. The members I spoke to don't have copies of it, as far as I know. But yeah, if someone's got the recording of Tutti Parze's last recordings, a lot of people are very, very interested in that. I think Billy Hughes was back involved in that too. You can't really have Tutti Parze without Billy. It'd be great to have some songs to hear the songs that he did with Tutti Parze. Just before he passed away, basically. So I've just got a clip here of Spacey, Stu, Jay, and Willie all reflecting on Tutti Parze's legacy. And then I don't think we need to talk anymore. We'll play the clip of them all chatting, and then we'll just go into another song from the 7-inch called TRG, You Are Scum.
It was a mass of people, a group of people that were just trying to survive in an environment at the time that found the best way to get out was through music. And the best way to keep people together, the best way to fight, the best way to be heard was through music, and it still is to this day. And then born out of that was a lifetime of friendships and family, really. So we're very lucky with that, for sure. And still to this day, very lucky.
Of course, still, I feel you have to play the game of society to sort of get through it, and, it's not always... You can't always hold 100% to your guns of what you thought when you were younger and you were living in a bubble, or, things were a lot simpler. But yeah, for sure, all of those ideals are still there for me, very much left of centre, and, think about the environment. Primarily that thing is just to question things, not just accept, what governments or police or even society in general would tell you to do.
I think Will, the singer especially, would have been, he came from that early, I'm sure he came from that early squat, that famous squat down in Melbourne. I met a couple of people from the Orphanage, and they're all special people, they're all really passionate, they're very worldly, they've seen a lot of things, and we'll probably embrace that and took the band away. And I remember they were all taken off to Nimbin for that big show. But like Tutti Parze paved the way for everything, I reckon. Like, if there was no Tutti Parze, I dare say that there would have been no toe-to-toe. I remember reading in a fanzine, and I remember seeing an article about how every butcher shop on King Street had their windows smashed. And pretty sure this was in a fanzine, and it was alluding to the point that it was not Tutti Parze directly, but it was a bunch of Sydney punks who, they were the main players, and they were fucking, all into animal rights and shit. And they took some direct action and went out and smashed all the windows. And when I read that, I was like, nowadays I feel sorry for the butcher shops when I think about it now. But back then, being 18 or whatever, I'm thinking, fuck yeah, man. This is it. These dudes do the real deal. This is some serious direct action, they're fighting for what they believe in, and actually doing shit. Nowadays, I'd probably, if someone said they were going to brick a butcher shop window, I'd say, mate, leave it alone, go and do the Woolworths instead. But, back then it was really exciting, and it was something that you really wanted to be a part of.
A bunch of broke-ass kids with nothing can get fucking shitty instruments from pawn shops, Learn to fucking play them, learn their craft and do it. And fake it till you make it. Look, in the 80s, every suburb you went to, you go down the street and there'd be kids playing in a band in mum and dad's garage, yeah? Suburban kids. There was only rock and roll. That was fucking it, though. Getting your instrument with your mates and you can't fucking play and working out how to get two fucking notes that are done totally wrong, but somehow you get some half-assed sounding note out and then rocking out of time for 45 minutes with that one fucking two-note song with your mates and thinking it was the best thing ever. If people look back at Tutti Parze for anything, I want it to inspire them to do that. I can't fucking sing. I don't have the fucking answers. I don't know shit, mate. I just fucking could pretend I could. And it was meant to sound like that. No, that's not bad. That's what it was meant to sound like. Yeah? Myanmar, before the Civil War, was like they had taken where Tutti Parze and Jellyheads left off and fucking carried on in Myanmar. Like, it was the most fucking revolutionary scene. They were, like, doing gigs. They've been supporting refugee camps, the punk scene, for years, paying for schools for refugee kids. Like, they did Food Not Bombs in the cities in Myanmar. Like, yeah, no, it was really inspirational, but, half of them would be dead because they didn't just sing about it. They took up arms. Punk rock and the punk scene was fucking fantastic till the Cold War finished. All right? And everything just turned to fucking shit, mate. But Rapey Bone Spurs with his fucking candy floss hair made of urine is now fucking going to be president of America. So I expect a lot of good fucking punk rock to happen now. Like, bad shit's going to happen, mate. Bad shit makes good punk rock. It's not good punk rock is not created fucking surrounded by marshmallows, flowers, and fucking unicorns. It comes from fucking tragedy, mate. And class war.